So a kinesiology talk that I thought would be interesting is going on Instagram and looking at some Instagram fitness things and then kind of talking about them. The movement that fixes weak jumps. So they go into a Zercher hold and then they jump up and outwards. This is genius. I've never seen this before, but when I saw this, I was like, that's like the most genius thing I've ever seen. So if anyone's ever kind of heard me talk about athletic performance, I always talk about hip extension. So you want your hips to extend a lot because that's what pushes you forwards. That's also what pushes weight up. So if you're squatting or deadlifting or doing anything like that, you're also hip extending. And you want to extend all the way to maximal extension. So that's the first thing this has going for it, is it just does great hip extension all the way through to maximal extension. So, and that's required when you jump, is you can't stop halfway, you're not going to get anywhere. So anytime you're jumping, you're doing really great hip extension to kind of end range. Okay, now the second part of this is a bit more complex. When we look at the force curves of muscles, it's different when you look at one muscle versus combinations of muscles. So a typical force curve, like if we look at my arm, it's very kind of weak if it's extended out like this. There's not a lot of muscular overlap. And then as it gets stronger here, there's a great amount of muscular overlap. So it's very strong in this middle range. And then when we get up here, the muscle bumps into itself and it's not as strong. So it goes like weak to weak, kind of like a bell curve. When we look at multiple muscle movements, like this jump that they're doing, or like a squat or a deadlift or a bench press or something like that, where there's multiple muscles going kind of at the same time, they don't go all the way to end range typically. They typically kind of stop in that little bell curve. So instead of it going weak at the end, it just goes up and it's the strongest at the very end. So if you want to stress a movement maximally, you would apply a force that increases the higher you lift it. And we see a lot of like things like this in the gym. Like this is why people squat with chains, because there's less weight when the chain's on the ground, and as they lift it, it gets heavier and heavier as they lift more chain links off the ground. And then bands are another great example of this, particularly for those compound movements, because the band gets more tense and it's harder the more you stretch it. So the combination here of great hip extension and the band applying more resistance the further you go is amazing. And then the third thing I want to say is genius about this is the pace. So you could say, hey, just do a Zercher squat and then have the band pull you down. And then you've kind of got that benefit of the force curve matching that hip extension, but there isn't pace attached to that. So by getting someone to jump, you're exploding into end range through compound movement, like all the way with pace. So this is brilliant, brilliant programming. Whoever thought of this is really, really smart. Okay, on to the next one here. The fastest way to get knee gains. So he's doing some tibial flexion here. Stronger tibialis will prevent knee injuries and shin splints. Yeah, okay, so there's a few pieces to this. Oh, he's still going. Strengthen the muscle below the knee. Okay, so a few pieces to this. A lot of pieces to this. First, the good to this is he's kind of right. The tibialis does help with deceleration when you're running and helps prevent knee pain, just because it provides more of a cushion, kind of when your body lands on your foot, it'll kind of eccentrically contract and catch some of that weight. So it's kind of like a spring that'll decrease a bit of the force on your knee. So he's right about that. Now, as far as it strengthening your knee, that's inaccurate. The tibialis does not cross over the knee. It's a unique musculature to the ankle. Actually, all the ankle musculature is unique to the ankle. It doesn't cross over the knee. So a stronger ankle does not mean a stronger knee. Also, he's doing what's called open chain strengthening here. So we have two kind of general methods of chained exercise. We have open kinetic chain and closed kinetic chain. So an open kinetic chain means that the end of the joint is moving. So the point of the exercise is to move a weight. Closed kinetic chain is kind of like the opposite of that, like a force is coming into us and we want to resist that force. So an example would be like a plank. Like if we're holding a plank in our shoulders, like our weight is going up our shoulder, and if our shoulder didn't contract, then the weight of our body would dislocate our shoulder. So a rotator cuff kind of grabs our shoulder and pins it together so that it doesn't dislocate. So that's a closed kinetic chain move. It promotes stability in the joints, and then open chain movements create mobility and strength. Now, when we look at our bodies are the different pieces of our bodies are designed for different things. So when we look at our feet are designed to carry like our body weight. So they respond much better to closed kinetic chain exercises as opposed to open chain. So not a fan of the kind of open chain aspect of this. Okay, let's see what else I can find on here. What do we got here? Oh, yes. So here they have the, what the heck is that thing called? It's going to drive me crazy. The flex bar, which is a wrist rehab piece of equipment. It's really interesting. Yeah, you would typically only see this in like a rehab setting because you want to kind of stress each part of the wrist. So the wrist does a few things. So it does flexion, extension, radial deviation, ulnar deviation, supination, and pronation. So it kind of moves in 3 planes. And you can use this flex bar to rehab the entirety of the wrist. So it's really cool because you can put kind of the bar along your forearm, and then you can flex against it, and then you can put it against the kind of table, and then you can ulnar deviate against it, and then you can like wind it to create flexion. You can wind it the other way to create extension, and then what he's doing here is placing it on the table and then rotating it over to create pronation, to which you can then go the other way to create supination. So a really cool piece of equipment that you wouldn't see in a commercial gym, but used in rehab all the time to rehabilitate wrists, and just a really robust piece of equipment. Very cool. I actually saw this and it brought me back to my rehab days. So you don't see them very often, but really cool piece of equipment. Help with hip internal rotation. Just try it. Teaching you how to mobilize your hips. Yes, this is genius. Super duper genius, wild genius. So there's a few things that like, if you don't do them, you should do them because they're just insane return for benefits, like return on investment, in the sense that they're like, they consume very little time and yet they give incredible physical benefits to you. One of them is like back extension, another one is foam rolling, and then this one is hip traction. So the structure of the hip is kind of your femur goes up, and then there's like a little L shape that connects to the ball at the top of the femur called the acetabulum. That ball then sits deep inside of a socket. So our shoulder is very shallow, actually. It kind of like sits on top of the socket and slides around, which is why it has so much range. But the hip it sits deeper into the socket, which is why sometimes your hip will kind of bump into the sides of the socket and feel like it's stuck or locked. That's confounded by just the sheer size and tightness of the muscles around it. So the glute, strongest muscle in the body, pulling that hip backwards, that tight IT band on the right side, those tight adductors on the inside, everything's really tight and really strong and just pins that ball into that socket. And so what we see, particularly as a preventative measure for like hip osteoarthritis or hip pathology at that ball socket joint, is that traction is like the thing to prevent that. Now the research is really weird about it because the therapeutic dose for traction is something like 80 pounds of traction for like, I think 40 minutes or something like that. Like it's super long and a lot of traction. And so if you go to the physiotherapist, even if they pull that hip out and they apply that traction, there's no way they're applying 80 pounds for 40 minutes. It's just like unsustainable. So what she's doing here, taking that exercise band, and I actually do this all the time, you just take that, wrap it around the rack, and then you wrap it close to your hip, and then you go out sideways just like she is, and it's going to pull that ball out of that socket a little bit, which is going to help kind of like just decompact that socket and help you kind of get fluid in there to get nutrition into the kind of articulating surfaces of that joint. But it's also going to give you a little bit of extra range because that ball socket is less impinged by its depth. And so what she's doing here, where she's kind of working this internal rotation with traction, is getting a little bit more internal rotation without a lot of articular restriction. So this is really, really brilliant what she's doing. I want to add on, and I'm sure she knows about this if she knows about that, but this position of just getting out and putting that band around your hip is, you can combine that with like all kinds of different movements just to traction and kind of like get your hip going through these different motions without all that pressure. So basically what I recommend is putting that band around your hip just like she does, so that's kind of pulling your hip out sideways. And then just basically pick your favorite yoga positions, like do a down dog, do a lunge, do like a child's pose, and you'll feel that like hip traction is just gonna, like, you'll be able to get a lot into things much further, and it'll be much easier. And then you can kind of get the traction. Of course, it kind of just varies different angles as your hip moves back and forth out to the side. So it's great self-maintenance, and it's really fast and really easy. So this is absolutely genius from this woman here. Okay, next up we've got, if you had shoulder in overhead pressing until you started training your serratus. Okay, so a lot to unpack on this one. So first thing, we'll talk about the serratus is that like feather muscle. I think serratus is actually Latin for feather. And it's the one that kind of wraps around your ribs. So if you ever see somebody with like low body fat, you'll see like little feathering kind of along their the side of their ribs. That's the serratus. And what it does is it binds, like your shoulder blade sits against your back like this, and the serratus extends out from your shoulder blade to the front of your ribs, and it pins your shoulder blade into your back like that to prevent it from flying out. If your shoulder blade flies out and impinges your shoulder, it becomes kind of problematic. So your serratus kind of pulls it in, and then kind of unimpinges the glenohumeral joint. So it gives you kind of some range of motion there. So having a strong serratus is kind of helpful. Now, the thing with the serratus is that would be kind of its clinical implications. As far as functional implication goes, it really just helps with a bit of like this kind of shoulder popping. Like if you locked your arm out and then just like pressed it forwards without any kind of bending, your serratus is just pulling your shoulder blade along your back. So that's kind of like what it does functionally. The serratus, I'm going to be honest, pretty much never train it. I never intentionally target it because it's not the most important muscle in those kind of like combinations. So if you're looking at what we call scapular retraction, so getting your shoulder blades back, kind of as I described, you're going to want to strengthen kind of the low trap, the rhomboids, and kind of the things like that kind of more so help with scapular depression and scapular rotation. They're much bigger muscles, they're stronger muscles, and they'll pin that scapula more consistently than serratus. And then for shoulder stability in general, again, there's so much musculature binding to the posterior scapula that we don't see a lot of instability there. Usually the instability is in the actual cuff at the joint, in which case you would strengthen the piece of the cuff that's missing. So the serratus is not something you would focus on very traditionally. And then the way that you strengthen it is not what she's doing. So I kind of mentioned what, or maybe she's got a bit of shoulder blade motion here. So you can see how her shoulder blade kind of like pulls forward like that. So that's the serratus pulling it forward. But because she's creating tricep extension here, the motion is not going to be isolated to that serratus. So she's doing that because she's intentionally doing that. But if you told somebody to go do this, it wouldn't, they probably wouldn't get their serratus. They'd probably just get tricep and some delt because they're pressing out like that. It's more consistent to isolate and then press a straight arm out because you're kind of feeling specifically for one muscle instead of multiple muscles. So not a fan of this exercise-wise. Now, shoulder pain with overhead pressing due to the serratus is... so there's a few things there. There's a lot going on in this post. Shoulder pain with overhead pressing is typically not due to the serratus. It's typically due to the supraspinatus, which is the top of the rotator cuff. So your rotator cuff, your shoulder joint has like a ball. It goes in a socket. As it goes upwards, your deltoid begins to pull it out of its socket, and your rotator cuff pops it back in. Whenever the rotator cuff is not strong enough, your joint will begin to kind of dislocate a little bit, or begin to pinch and impinge the things around it because it's not being popped in appropriately. And the supraspinatus is the most common muscle that does that too. And the supraspinatus activates in kind of three motions. Early range abduction, so if you reach across your body and touch your opposite pocket, that'll be your supraspinatus. If you adduct greater than 90 degrees, so any motion up here is going to be my supraspinatus. Or if I abduct and externally rotate, that will be my supraspinatus creating that motion. So pain with overhead pressing is typically due to that supraspinatus range up here not being strong enough to pull the ball back in the socket. So that's the most common type of overhead pressing shoulder pain. Now, it's possible that some like pressing of the scapula backward from that weight is possible, and you might feel that in your upper back. But I would attribute that. So, lots going on this. But she does have great scapular motion in this video, which is really interesting to see. Okay, what do we got next? Okay, wow. So we've got a jammer press, a sled push, and half-turn ball slams. And she's got some medals on. Okay, so we'll take this exercise by exercise here. So the first one that she's doing is a half rotation single arm jammer press with a band. So I already talked about how bands kind of like are great for that explosive compound movement. The jammer press is really great because it kind of like starts horizontal and then ends overhead, which is kind of what you would do naturally. Like if you're a football player and you're blocking someone, you're going to start horizontally and then press them overhead. Same thing if you ever like push a truck out of the mud, you start horizontally, press it out overhead. That's a very, very functional and performative movement. So great start on that. I absolutely love jammers. They're a great piece of equipment. I've honestly never been to a gym where they've had one, but it's the coolest piece of equipment ever. It's just so functional and just really brilliant. And then these the half rotation. So she's doing half rotation both with the ball slam and that press, and that's a really really awesome thing. So when we look at rotation, there's kind of two things we want to get out of it. One is kind of low level. So when we rotate our trunk, our spinal stabilizers grab our vertebra and stabilize them so that they don't spin all at one vertebra. So they want to spin incrementally at each vertebra instead of all at one, which would sever our spinal cord. So as we do rotation, we build the musculature in our spine to create a more resistant spine. So rotation and anti-rotation are big parts of spinal rehab. But they're also big parts of like athletic performance. Being able to turn like that in any kind of movement is going to be really great. It's also going to create a lot of core strength by pinching in the sides of that abdominal cylinder. So I always talk about the abs being like a cylinder where you have a bottom, which is your pelvic floor. The top is your diaphragm. The front is like your transverse abdominis, rectus abdominis. The back is your quadratus lumborum. And the sides are your oblique that wrap around. So by doing this rotation movement, she's strengthening her core strength for more transverse pressure. So it's kind of interesting. You do more rotation, and then you'll be able to squat more weight. So Really, really great programming. So we'll go to exercise number 2, the sled push. Okay, sled pushes. Amazing, amazing exercise. One, infinitely levelable. Everybody can come in and push a sled, like everybody can do that. And yet, it never becomes easy to anybody. Like back when I was training strongman, I was pushing like 360 pounds, and that's stupidly hard. And like, so you can just keep adding more weight, and it's always going to be hard. And it requires hip extension, it requires shoulder stability to push it through, and it's also extremely safe. If like you get tired or your form degenerates, you're not dropping a weight on top of you, you just stop pushing. So it's unlikely to get injured from it. Brilliant, brilliant exercise. And then the ball slam here. I'm going to talk a bit about the ball slam because it's genius and I don't see a lot of people do it. It's become more popular over the last like 5 years. But explosive shoulder extension is really rare. So when we consider like a plyometric movement, we want to go through things very fast. And that's really intuitive for like, say, shoulder flexion. So if you're ever going to like, throw something, like shot put is really great. Shoulder flexion, that's really explosive. But how do you train explosive kind of extension? And we see this explode again over the last 5 years with things like rowing machines are like a really big one, like band explosive rows. And then these ball slams that she's doing where she's explosively loading that weight all the way down to end range, really building those fast twitch fibers into shoulder extension. So this is really excellent personal training and programming done on this. Really good exercises going on here. Okay, the stuff makes us more athletic and explosive. Sprinter start jumps, band of resistance pogo hops, rear foot elevated quick hops, and then single leg pogo hops. Okay, so, oh, and then even more squat jump 180s. Okay, lots going on here. So we'll start with the sprinter start skips here. So I'm personally not a big fan of this type of thing. Like this would be great if you are on vacation or if you're working out with no equipment. You're building that speed, but if you're an athlete and you're pursuing athletics, you're going to need some kind of additional load on top of this. So they should be doing this with weight. They should be pressing something while they're doing this. There needs to be some resistance added to this. Because again, if you're an athlete of any kind, your body weight is not enough to stress you with this movement. So cool, cardio-wise, strength-wise, it's not going to help anyone that trains seriously. Pogo hops, not bad. Like, and this is kind of interesting. I really like the banded pogo hop here for some specific reasons here. Now, the ankle is really interesting because it has a very thick Achilles tendon on it. And the tendon is very elastic. So what you want is that elastic kind of takes some of the force and just bounces you as you walk so that there's less muscle work occurring while you walk. So there's some inherent kind of elastic bounce going on. Now, if you train into that bounciness, you get a little bit more of an elastic tendon, and then walking and running is less effort for you. So the banded pogo hops is kind of interesting. And that is something like, I haven't done this, I've never prescribed it, but I could see how that would be interesting to someone that's, a runner and wants more kind of maybe explosive hopping from the ankle joint. So you could use that in addition to like some hip extension stuff, and I could see that actually being a really good idea. What's up next here? Quick hops, kind of pointless here. Again, same comments as the lunge. You need to have weights on there. Probably also, for most people, going to be redundant here. If she's doing the pogo hops, you could do some calf raises, and your calves are not going to be the limiting factor for you. It's going to be likely IT band length, glute strength, general cartilaginous quality of your knee. This is unlikely to really help in any kind of performance here, doing this little quick hop like this. And it looks really dangerous, like super dangerous. Same comments apply to this. Again, high risk, very little reward. 180-degree squat jump. Okay, I actually love this. So squat jumps, you load all the way to that end range of hip extension, so that's really great for the hips. You're getting that rotation for the obliques. Again, when you can add in rotation in a safe way, that's going to like multiply your athleticism. So adding in that squat jump, you're getting really great end range glute extension and rotation. That's a really great movement. And because you're combining what are called degrees of freedom, or ways that your bodies move, so she's combining extension and rotation, you wouldn't need to load that because it's just going to stress the muscles appropriately because of the combination of direction. So that's a really interesting move. So yeah, that's my Instagram Ruby's Kinesiology talk. I hope that this was interesting. Yeah, I feel like I talked about a lot of things there. So if you have any questions about anything, or anything you suggest that I talk about on Ruby's Kin Talks, let me know about it.